Good Thursday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock, time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. 5 weeks, Browns will be getting underway. Training camp out of Greenbrier in West Virginia. Kevin Stefanski on the Rich Eisen Show, Tom Pelissaro hosting, talking about the state of the Browns as they head into this break before training camp.
Really pleased with the guys and how they handled this offseason and the offseason program. Really, the guys took it head on. We have a new defensive system, new special team system, so there's a lot to learn. And then offensively, as you know, you're constantly evolving. So I was really glad the guys took advantage of the meeting time, the time on the field. And then, like anything else, and you know this, Tom, every year is different. Every year stands on its own merit. So the getting to know your teammates part of that, the building of your 2023 culture part of that, I think is as important as anything you do in the spring and summer. So we worked really hard at that. I mean, we have a bunch of new faces in that locker room, and just letting those guys kind of know what we're about, what we've built, and kind of where we envision this thing going. I think that's as important as any X's and O's you do in the spring.
And with that, let's welcome in Quincy Carrier, host of Untitled, Unfiltered Browns coverage. Quincy, what did we learn about the Browns from minicamp and where they're at as they head into this 5-week break until they get into training camp?
We learned that they look like how we want them to look like, right? Like, this is what you would expect. Hey, the offense looks a little bit different. We're seeing some wrinkles in there. We're seeing the wide receivers really shine in this period, and we're seeing Deshaun Watson look nice and comfortable. This is what we wanted, and it's different this year because in previous years, I think we would be a little bit more excited because we were hoping that it looked like this. We kind of expect it to look like this. It's just we've never seen it before, so we're kind of in an awkward place as fans and media around this team. But I think that's what we learned from minicamp is, hey, everything looks like it's on schedule.
Yeah, and you know what? Thankfully, everything looks like it's on schedule. Back to Kevin Stefanski on the Rich Eisen Show, talking about how much different this offense will look this year compared to last year.
It should be, in that every year you have to change and adapt and evolve. I think there's certain things that we've done just in our time here in Cleveland that are good and sound, and we'll continue to do them. I think there's other things that we've explored throughout last year, certainly throughout this offseason. Spent a lot of time in the offseason, in the practices, working at things that maybe we haven't majored in, if you will. But at the end of the day, and I've said this many times, there's no limit to the amount of football plays. There's no limit to the amount of plays that you can draw up on the board. It's really getting a firm grasp of the things that our quarterback likes, that our players know how to operate, that feature our running back, that feature our wide receivers, our tight ends. It's really, how do you fit this to our guys? Because, again, could I draw up 1,000 plays? You could, but what are the 50 plays that you're going to run on Sunday that you're going to feel good about, that the players are going to feel really good about?
Quincy, years past, I don't know that we've talked about plays that our quarterback likes. So I like the idea that he seems to be willing to give up some control of the offense to his quarterback.
Yeah, and it's about the respect there between the two players and the idea that one can be able to take that responsibility, right? Because with Baker Mayfield, that trust was not there from both the coaching staff and the player to be able to take it to that next level. But now, you know, they have enough faith in Deshaun Watson, given what he's done in the league so far, that he is the guy to be able to take the reins there. So it's a level of trust. You don't trade for somebody the caliber of Deshaun Watson and the price of Deshaun Watson to relegate him to be a product of the coaching staff. You trade for that guy because he's not just an asset with his ability to throw the football, he's an asset with his mind as well. And if you don't fully utilize what you traded for, then you're going to waste your money. So that's what I think the Browns are on. Like, you got to fully utilize Deshaun Watson in every way possible. And the reason great quarterbacks are so expensive, worth so much draft picks and so many cap spots, is because they help you and they help everybody else on the offense when they can contribute in more ways than just throwing the football.
But isn't it good to hear Kevin Stefanski saying that and verbalizing that? Sometimes it's an unstated. If you go out and say it, he's going to give his quarterback the freedom that good quarterbacks, elite quarterbacks get.
Yeah, sometimes you got to state the obvious just so nobody asks why you haven't stated the obvious yet. And I think that's good for that perspective. And with Kevin, Kevin sometimes can not state the obvious because he's just like trying not to say anything for whatever reason. But yeah, I think it's a good thing to just mention it, just to make everybody feel good so we can hear what we need to hear to think that things are on track. And that's what this offseason has been. Everything seems to be on track, on time. And it's not the most exciting offseason in the world, but exciting off seasons usually mean that we're all over the place on this track. So, this is a nice on schedule train that we have here for the Browns.
Boring off seasons are good when you win. It's the chaos that creates other things. All right, Pro Football Focus.
They're good for everybody but us.
Pro Football Focus wide receiving core rankings. Bengals 1. Eagles 2, Dolphins 3, Browns 22. They say Amari Cooper unquestioned wide receiver 1. Tough sledding over the last few seasons. They mention Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Njoku, Marquise Goodwin. 22 seems awfully low to me. I get why they are not a quote-unquote top 10, but 22 is bottom 10. It's just outside the bottom 10.
I would have to see what every other team has at wide receiver and who were some of the teams that were ranked above them around that 15 to 20 spot, because I think one, like we really do reduce what Amari Cooper does in like his ability as a wide receiver. I think he's one of the better ones in the league. He's been on 3 different teams and he's been very good on 3 different teams. Tell me a bunch of wide receivers who could do that, right? 3 different teams, a bunch of different quarterbacks. He's been good. That's special right there. And to toss aside, like Donovan Peoples-Jones is a solid piece there, right? David Njoku is a solid piece there. I don't know. I think this is a little bit lower than I would put them. I would put them probably closer to the middle of the league. But I have to see if this is a situation where 22 is not necessarily bad because everybody has really good wide receiving cores, or is 22 just like reflective of a underestimation of a couple of guys on this team?
All right, you got Ravens at 15, the Steelers were 18, the Commanders were 19, the Jets were 20, and the Saints were 21. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's low.
I don't know about that one. Yeah, that seems low.
and it's coming from Pro Football Focus, who, yesterday we did something where they had Amari Cooper in the top 3 in routes run with PFF grade last year, next to guys like Jamar Chase and Stephon Diggs. So I don't. Are they that down on Donovan Peoples-Jones, Elijah Moore, Marquise Goodwin, David Njoku? I don't have the answer to that.
It's kind of like Amari Cooper has that same thing Nick Chubb has, so like people just find reasons to sleep on him for no reason. Like it's just like, oh, you just don't like. There's something about Amari Cooper that just don't click with some of these guys nationally, so they don't give him the respect that he deserves. But he's been one of the better receivers in the league for a very long time. He got drafted in 2014. Like, he's been doing this a very long time. And he was one of the best receivers in college when he came out. But it just seems like he just never gets the status that he deserves. And for a guy who's in that stage of his career, who just put up career numbers, I mean, that should be mentioned in the article, right? Like,
and he was hurt. So, all right, but be that as it may. Let's talk a little bit about Elijah Moore. How do you hope that the Browns use him? We saw him in the backfield during mandatory minicamp, and that kind of perked my eyes up. What are your thoughts about the way they should use Elijah Moore?
They have to find out how Elijah Moore is comfortable being used, right? Because one of the issues with Elijah is that due to his situation in New York, he didn't really get enough playing time to know what he would be comfortable doing outside of running like a handful of routes, right? We know he can run that corner post, that outside post. He's a good route runner. But when it comes to like doing end arounds, it's one thing to be comfortable doing that at Ole Miss. A whole nother thing to be comfortable doing that in the NFL, in the AFC North, where TJ Watt's coming after you on one side and Cam Hayward is coming at you on the other. So I think that's going to be important for this team. I think that's what the preseason is going to be important for with Elijah Moore, and especially those joint practices with the Philadelphia Eagles, is let's figure out what Elijah is actually comfortable doing outside of just the regular wide receiver stuff, and let's figure out how we can use it. It might look like Deebo Samuel. It might look like something else, but I think that's what we're going to be able to watch during the training camp period is, hey, how do they use Elijah Moore, and where does Elijah Moore feel comfortable? It's going to be very important for them for the rest of the season.
Quincy Carrier and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little defense. Sports for CLE. I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Quincy Carrier from Untitled Unfiltered Browns coverage. This again from the Rich Eisen Show. Kevin Stefanski talking about his impressions early on of Zadarius Smith.
Ball of energy, man. Holy cow. That dude. First, he walks into the building. I'm at my desk. I'm working on something, and he's stealth, too, because I'm working, and all of a sudden, before I know it, he sneaks up behind me, puts me in a huge bear hug. I haven't talked to him on the phone, but I haven't even met him. So he is a big, strong dude. So I would say you hear him before you see him, but in this case I didn't. But when you're out there at practice, his energy is infectious. He works hard at it. He's a pro. He's been there in big games. He's performed. So I'm thrilled to have him. I know he elevates our defensive play, but I also think he elevates our locker room in getting a vet that loves this game.
And it seems like the Browns made a conscious effort to go and get guys like that. You think of Thornhill, he's younger, but he's a guy who's all about football. McLeod, I would say the same thing. It looks like that was a focus. Let's bring guys that are really good locker room guys that can play.
Well, in general, and when you bring in somebody at any job, you want to make sure that you can kick it with them, right? Like that you can be there an amount of time with this person and feel like they're not going to be a detriment to the team unless they are so insanely talented that you're willing to work around it, or you're so desperate that you just have to work around a specific situation. So that shows that the Browns had more leverage in the offseason, right? Because when you have that leverage in the offseason, when you don't have to be desperate to make some of these moves, you don't have to go for some of the bigger gambles when it comes to, you know, personalities or locker rooms or things that you might not feel like are going to fit or mesh well. So I think that speaks to the belief around the league within players that this is going to be a better team. I think that also speaks to Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry and this staff and their ability to make this place a more welcoming place, because again, if you don't have a good reputation, then you end up having to compromise those values that we all look for whenever we try to bring somebody into anything that we're doing. So I think that really speaks to the improvement that they've done with the brand of the Browns, at least within the players itself.
Pete Prisco, CBS Sports, top 100 players in the NFL. Top 3 were quarterbacks. Number 5 is Myles Garrett from the Browns. So Garrett, top 5 players regardless of position. It went Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, 1, 2, and 3. I'm really curious to what happens with Garrett now that he has some talent, not some, but a lot of talent on that defensive line and a different go-get-'em kind of attitude.
Yeah, this is the year for him, right? Like, if it's going to happen, if he's going to and it sounds crazy, if he's going to evolve past a 16-sack-a-year guy, this is the year, right, for him to reach that upper echelon of 18 to 20 sacks. We've really had a crazy era of pass rushers the last few years. But this is the year for Myles Garrett, right? Everything seems to be in line. He has help inside. He has help outside. He has a different philosophy at the defensive line. This seems to be the year where it's all going to line up, because the only thing that you could say that TJ Watt has over Myles Garrett over the last few years are some of those cumulative numbers. But if you look at some of the way that he was used, the tape, you can see where Myles is a better player. He's just not used in a similar way. This year's going to be different for him. He's going to have the opportunity to impact the game as much as anybody. And a lot of people are very high on his ability to do that. Also, let's also think about, he's reaching his prime. Right? Yep. He's getting up there to 26, 27 years old. 27. He was in the same draft as Deshaun Watson. So this is a guy reaching his athletic prime. He's finally in a situation that makes sense. He has good help around him. This could be a year for him. I understand why a lot of people are high on Myles Garrett.
Yeah, I agree. And Nick Bosa was the other guy that was ahead of him in that list. So it went to 3 quarterbacks and Bosa. All right, back to the Rich Eisen show. Kevin Stefanski talked about the hiring of Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator.
Coach Schwartz is somebody that I have a ton of respect for, having competed against him over the years. We have a lot of mutual friends. We didn't know each other well, but a ton of guys that I've worked with, that he's worked with. Andrew Berry was with Coach Schwartz previously. So just getting to know him through that process, we are very, very similar. He came up through quality control just like I did. He's a really he's a hard worker. He's a no-nonsense type of guy. So the guy fit a lot of what we do. And then you just talk schematically and what he's been able to accomplish from a 4-down front in terms of rushing the passer, affecting the quarterback, playing really sound in the back end. I think he checked a lot of boxes for us.
Quincy, how anxious are you to see what this defense looks like on the field?
Incredibly, right? Because there seems to be 2 different worlds that we live in with this defense. Because there's a world that we live in hypothetically where we just look at names on the roster, the names on the coaching staff, and we're like, this should be a top 5 defense. But then there's also the world that we have to live in where we acknowledge that last year happened. And for them to go from decent to what they were last year would be an incredible statistical jump, let alone top 5, right? That's where I'm at. I can understand why people are running away with top 5 this and this is going to be a great defense. I have a hard time having that expectation for a defense that less than a year ago I saw give up a 13-point lead in 1 minute and 40 seconds to Joe Flacco. You know what I mean? There are those 2 things that we have to grapple with: how talented, how right this defense feels versus how awful they were last year. And I can't ignore it. I don't think anybody can ignore it. Joe Woods, yes, he was a part of the problem. But, man, all the problems ain't going to be solved that quick, right? That's crazy. In one offseason? That was a lot of problems.
You know what? Here's kind of, as I thought through this, when you have talent like a Myles Garrett, like a Denzel Ward, like a Greg Newsome, those are first-round guys. Just go let them play. Don't get tricky. Don't overcomplicate it, and I think they got caught into that. Along those lines, who are you anxious to see how Jim Schwartz uses this year?
Denzel Ward is the one that I'm really anxious to see. What I'm anxious to see, hey, did any of these guys in the last 3 years pick up bad habits that are going to take a while to get rid of? And when I think of all of the bad habits that could have been created from how that defense was ran, I look at Denzel Ward as the guy who suffered the most from bad habits that could have resulted because of the Jim Schwartz system, right? A lot of those issues that he had in that system were just, not Jim Schwartz, but Joe Woods' system. But a lot of the issues he had in that system were, bad habits, focus drops, where he just lost focus on something like that. So that's who I'm most anxious to see, because I think when he's at his best, when he's playing at his best, he is one of the best in the league. But I can also see where he picked up some bad habits that are going to take him a while to drop, maybe even more than a season to drop before he's ready to be the same guy that we saw him be early in his career and at parts during the Joe Wood era.
Quincy Carrier and I are going to step aside, take another break. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little bit about the trades that the Browns have made in reshaping this roster. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Quincy Carrier from Untitled, Unfiltered Browns coverage. On the Rich Eisen Show again, Kevin Stefanski talked about the trades and remaking the Browns roster.
Credit to AB and his crew for constantly looking for those opportunities to add good players. And as you know, there's sometimes good players are available for reason X, Y, or Z, and maybe the compensation isn't what you thought it would have to be in a normal circumstance. And adding, like you mentioned, Darius and Elijah Moore, these are guys that I think fit what we do from a schematics. I know they fit what we do from a schematics. I also know they fit who we are as people, as the culture. I mean, adding Amari Cooper a couple of years ago and to watch that guy work and watch him perform, my God, watching that dude in one-on-ones working his craft versus defensive backs and see it in the games. But Amari also fits who we are. He doesn't say much. He's really about that work, but he's a pro's pro. So I think AB is going to constantly be looking to add players that fit who we are. But I think I go back, Tom, to it's an every year proposition. It's 2023. It's really, that's what matters most to us, not so much what has happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future.
And Quincy, it's kind of interesting. Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski have both said every year is each in its own and very different. And this year, you could tell by some of the moves they made that there's an emphasis on getting it done this year.
There's an emphasis on getting it done. There's an emphasis on the issues that they have. And one of the things I would point out is that Andrew Berry's done this every year he's been here. And that's an encouraging sign, right? He's not one of these guys that are going to let a problem exist on the roster and not do anything about it and not bring in anybody about it. He's always going to be tinkering, trying to find some solutions there, and eventually he's going to hit on some things that are going to work well. So their ability to be flexible about the roster, I think, is a good thing. It's this thing that's going to benefit this team, especially when they're going to have to get a lot more creative in the next few years, getting around the cap situations that they're going to have with the quarterback contract. So I think that's an overall positive sign for the future of this team.
And again, a lot of people are saying there's no salary cap. Even with eventually when you restructure and renegotiate, the cap hit becomes bigger as you push it further and further down. So eventually the salary cap will force this team to make decisions. It's what happens to all good teams. It's what the Rams are going through right now.
Oh yeah, bill always comes due, right? You got to pay it eventually. You can kick it down the road, you can put it in a balloon, you can all this, but the bill eventually comes due, especially when it's that much money for Deshaun. I think the hope is, a combination of good timing and good franchise planning plus the cap going up in future years will mitigate that damage to where, a $40 million hit in 2021 or 2022, that hurts. That's a giant percentage of your cap. But maybe a $50 million hit in 2026, if the cap keeps going up, isn't the same, is a lesser hit than you would have taken if you would have just took the money straight up. That's the gamble that they're making. They're betting on the market rising, the prices, well, not the prices, but the salary cap to continue to rise so that when they do have to pay the bill, it's not a high percentage. And they're hoping that, the league continues to grow. And I think that's a safe bet to make.
Yeah, I would agree. Barring, another pandemic or something like that.
Hey,
All right.
don't even play around with that.
All right. Should the Browns think about signing Dalvin Cook? I know this is a topic you've addressed on one of your shows. What are your thoughts about the Browns pursuing Dalvin Cook?
I think Dalvin Cook would be great for me, you, and everybody else who has to write articles about the Browns right now. I don't think it would be that good for the team. And not saying he'll be a negative to the team. I'll just say I don't know if he really helps the Browns in any significant way, or if it makes sense for him. Even if it made sense for the Browns, I don't think it makes sense for him. I don't think there's going to be a lot of carries outside of Nick Chubb for a running back to be had this year in this offense. I don't think it's going to be more than 100. And I don't know if that's the role for Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook's always been a primary guy. He's always been a guy who gets better the more carries he gets. That opportunity is not going to be there. He's not necessarily a third down back. And every running back's not the same. Some guys need to play a little bit. Some guys, Nick Chubb, we got lucky because Nick Chubb can do both, right? He could get a little bit, get hot. He could do a lot. He can get all the carries. He could do all of it. But Dalvin Cook, he's not that type of running back. So I just don't see the need for it. It would be a great name and a great another name to add to the pile of names that we say whenever we bring up the Browns. But to be honest, the Browns have had a pile of names for a very long time. We want those names to start to turn into wins, and I don't know if bringing in Dalvin Cook would be helpful in the long term.
What about the expectations for Deshaun Watson? What should we expect from him in 2023?
It's interesting, right? With Deshaun Watson, what are those expectations for him? I say the lowest he could probably get away with without a majority of fans being upset, or even like a slight majority of fans being upset. He has to at least get over 4,000 yards. I would say probably like healthily over 4,000. So like probably 4,200, 27 touchdowns, and he can't have more than 11 interceptions. And I think we'll be all right with that. Like, I think that will be, you can't be upset at Deshaun if that's what he achieves. I think there is room for him to be even higher than that. I think he could play himself into the top 5 quarterback situation this year. He's never really been a fixture in that conversation. He's been a part of that conversation, but he's never been a fixture. This is the year to do it for him. He only has so many more years left to get into that conversation. So I think this is a year where he's either going to be in the top 10 conversation, which is fine. That'd be better than any quarterback we've ever had here in Cleveland. But his goal should be to get in that top 5 conversation. I think that's very possible for him statistically and play-wise.
The other thing is he has not played with a roster that is this loaded before. I mean, Texans had J.J. Watt. They didn't have the level of really good guys on defense. He never played with anybody like Nick Chubb. Amari Cooper is kind of a wash with DeAndre Hopkins. But Elijah Moore and Fuller. The wide receiving core is close. The offensive line and the running back are a whole lot better than he's used to.
To speak about the offensive line, just last year in those 6 games alone, he had the lowest pressure percentage he's ever had in his career. And by far, a 0.4 second improvement in pocket time. He went from 2.5 seconds in Houston to 2.9 in Cleveland, which is some of the highest stuff that you get in the league. Those are significant jumps in what's around him, especially on the offensive line. And I think it took him a while to get used to that. And we've seen this with quarterbacks, whether it be Jacoby Brissett, Baker Mayfield, and Deshaun Watson last year. It takes these quarterbacks a little bit of time to understand, I got time back there, right? Like Jacoby Brissett was a good example because he was panicking early on and making some quick throws when he didn't need to. And then you saw him get comfortable by the time he got to like his 4th or 5th game last year, where he was like, oh no, I got like a whole extra fraction of a second before I could panic because this offensive line is so good. I was talking to my people on the AFC North Talk podcast, and we were talking about the issues that the Browns fans were complaining about with the offensive line. And every other team in the AFC North, or every person that covered another team in the AFC North, told me the Browns have rich people problems at offensive line. Worried about Jed Wills is a rich person problem for the offensive line. And that's true. Yeah. They're very fortunate. DeJuan Jones might not play this year. Okay, we have first world problems on that offensive line, and I don't think we really grasp how fortunate we are because we spend so much time talking about what it's not. We don't realize 2.9 seconds in the pocket we give quarterbacks. It's crazy.
All right, offensive line. This is from BrownsWire.com. Which high-priced player will be the first to be traded for the Browns? They say Wyatt Teller. So one of those big guards. Good, but much better run blocker than a pass blocker. Offense will be throwing the ball more than it has going forward. Quincy, they're paying everybody on that line at or close to $10 million or more, and that is not sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Now, I would throw in this caveat. Yeah, I can understand where Wyatt Teller would make sense. But if DeJuan Jones looks anything like he gonna be good, and I wouldn't be surprised if Jack Conklin gets traded sooner than you would expect, because that's the one you got the plan to replace, right? Like, that's the thing. If you're gonna trade somebody, what's the plan to replace it? The Browns are not at a team that can just trade guys and not have a plan because we're not trying to win this year, right? So Wyatt Teller, I don't think that would be the guy that would be gone. Honestly, it's more likely that like Joe Bitonio retires and then that frees up money versus us getting rid of Wyatt Teller. I think maybe Ethan Posick is another one. They drafted Luke Whippler in the 6th round. If he turns out to be good, watch the 2 Ohio State guys they drafted this year on that offensive line. If they look like they're ready to play, and DeJuan Jones is the one where I'm willing to give an exception, he might be ready to play by the middle of the year, then those 2 guys might be the ones that we're seeing expendable because you got the plan to replace them. You get rid of Wyatt Teller, who's playing guard? I don't know. Like, we're talking about a project filling guard, and say what you want about Wyatt Teller as a pass protector. Again, we have rich people problems. He's a really, really, really good run blocker. He's just a pretty good pass protector. So I don't think we got to trade Wyatt Teller because, we're not going to run the ball. And we still got Nick Chubb. I promise you, Wyatt's going to be able to run block. He's going to be able to do it. He's going to be able to do both. He's pretty good at both.
Quincy Carrier and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, ranking the Browns position groups. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
Quincy Carrier from Untitled Unfiltered Browns coverage, and I continue talking Browns. This again from BrownsWire. So ranking the Browns position groups from strongest to weakest. So strongest position group on the Browns this year, they say the offensive line. It is among one of the strongest in the NFL. Number 2, defensive ends, and they did bolster that quite a bit in free agency. Number 3, cornerbacks. And you think Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome, along with Martin Emerson. Number 4, quarterbacks. Number 5, wide receivers. And again, you add Elijah Moore, Goodwin, to Amari Cooper, along with Donovan Peoples-Jones. So, Quincy, those are the top 5. Offensive line, defensive ends, cornerbacks, quarterbacks, wide receivers. I get those. I get those all. I think the defensive end one has been upgraded significantly with Smith and Okunrankwo.
Oh, yeah. And this is one of those things where it's like, hey, don't be too fret because something's at the bottom of the list if the list is really good, right? And that's what the Browns roster is. It's a very good list, right? The offensive line, you can put them at number 1. That can make sense. Defensive end, you can put them at 2. Cornerback, the fact that you have a quarterback room with Deshaun Watson and you're only putting that at 4, it tells you the strength around him when you believe that Deshaun Watson can be a top 5 quarterback. Not necessarily that he is right now, but he could be a top 5 quarterback, which not many teams feel like their guy has the potential to do that. So, yeah, this is a very strong room. These are very strong position groups. I mean, that cornerback room is slept on. They got 3 really good outside corners. The defensive ends, Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, Okoronkwo, and then you also have, the wild cards of Alex Wright in his second year. Maybe he makes a leap. He was a third-round pick last year. Isaiah McGuire, maybe he's ready to go earlier than we think here. Like, this is a pretty good team.
All right, so we're going to go the bottom 5 of them. So the 6th-ranked position group, the tight ends. You got Njoku, and they brought in Akins, and you got Harrison Bryant. Running backs, Nick Chubb. I know you don't have a lot proven behind him, but 7th, they're going running backs. Safeties are 8th. You got Delpit, Juan Thornhill, and McLeod. Pretty good room there. And then the defensive tackles, you did bring in Tomlinson. You drafted Ika, but I get that. And number 10, linebackers. Now, you got Anthony Walker and JOK. But I get it. If you were thinking of positions that you would like to upgrade, I guess linebacker and defensive tackles would be the 2 that would jump out.
Yeah, putting running back below tight end and wide receiver seems a little bit off to me. Like, yeah, I know. Oh, they only got Nick Chubb. Oh, what we gonna do? What we gonna? Oh, we gonna run Nick Chubb? Oh my goodness, Miss Brown's running attack is cooked. We have no other option than to run the best running back in football. I think who was Jim Brown backup? Do it matter? Like, doesn't matter who his backup was? Hey, who was Adrian Peterson's backup? I don't know. Like, you don't know? Nobody knows. Didn't matter. AP there, So I understand that you're ranking the room, but you can't. These ain't all equals, man. One Nick Chubb is worth like what? A whole David Njoku plus a Jordan Atkins plus something else. I'm sorry, and it's also worth Amari Cooper and a DPJ. That Nick Chubb, I promise you, when other teams are game planning against the Cleveland Browns, it goes Deshaun Watson. Okay, we got to figure out what we're going to do here. Myles Garrett. Okay, let's figure out there. And then Nick Chubb. And then everybody else is everybody else on the team after that, okay? But those are the 3 guys. If you key players, when they bring up the Browns, those 3 guys, that's it. That's the core. So, yeah, I would say we're really low on Nick Chubb for whatever reason this offseason. He only had, the second best year of his career last year? Like, I don't know what's going on.
I think they'll be all right at running back if 24 is good to go for 17 games. All right, this again from the Rich Eisen Show. Tom Pelissaro, who's more likely to make the playoffs this coming year? Steelers or the Browns?
The Steelers, you can bet, are going to be on the doorstep. Right? It's Mike Tomlin's team.
Yep.
Never had a losing season. They're always going to be right there.
They're right there last year.
I think the Browns have more variance because they didn't win a whole lot of games last year. But if Deshaun Watson is Deshaun Watson again, there's unlimited upside for how good Cleveland can be. I mean, nobody wants to try to block Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith on that defense. Jim Schwartz is going to change the way that they play. He's going to have an attacking style. You know that because he's got a long track record of doing that. They add a guy like Elijah Moore, who they really highly regard as a slot type of receiver, to Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones. They've still got Nick Chubb in the backfield. I think that Deshaun Watson's the biggest X factor in all this. That's a tough call. I mean, if you're saying, if I'm playing the percentages here, I say the Steelers just because I know that they're going to be competitive. But the Browns are a team that, if things go their way, I mean, I don't think it's outlandish to say we could be talking about a team that can contend to win it all.
I don't disagree with anything that he said in assessing that question.
The only thing I would disagree with is the Steelers will be around the conversation. I don't know if they're good enough to be in the playoffs this year. I think that their ceiling might be just a tad bit under playoffs because their defense is good. It's not as good as it's been, right? Their secondary is completely neutered. They're throwing out Pat Peterson out there to play corner at this point. And then that offense, there's a level of variance there with that offense. We're talking about a team that had 12 passing touchdowns last year with a quarterback in Kenny Pickett to where, hey, they're really hoping he makes a sophomore leap, and a sophomore leap would be significant for that team, but it wouldn't bring them past 20 touchdown passes or something like that. And what happens if Kenny Pickett, like a lot of sophomore quarterbacks, regresses from 12 touchdowns? What are you doing then on offense, right? that's where I'm like, hey, the floor of that team is what it is on a Mike Tomlin team, but the ceiling is what I really worry about with that Steelers team. And yeah, they can get to 9 wins, but I don't think they're going to be able to win enough within the AFC to be able to be a team that can get the tiebreakers that they need to get into the playoffs.
Quincy Carrier, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Quincy.
No problem.
All right, Quincy Carrier, make sure to check him out until Untitled, Unfiltered Browns coverage. Always really good stuff. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out, other side of the break. We are joined by Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
Sports4CLE continues. We continue talking Browns. This again from the Rich Eisen Show. Tom Pelissaro hosting. Kevin Stefanski talked about where Deshaun Watson is.
I'm really pleased with where Deshaun is. As you can imagine, and you mentioned, there was a lot going on, and it was at 6 games last season. And, as a team, we were not perfect. We were up and down. I think we went 3-3 in the games that Deshaun played. As a player, there was some up and down, but there were really glimpses of some impressive, I'll call elite quarterback play that we've all seen from him over the course of his career. So I think where he is right now, hard to compare, to a year ago, but I certainly see a comfort level in what we're doing offensively. I see a guy who's always going to be that guy leading from out in front. That's kind of who he is, and I don't see that wavering one bit. So I'm excited about Deshaun. I think he's really taken the bit in terms of the leadership, and he's going to get the guys together over this break and throw down there in points unknown. But the guy's really taken everything that we've thrown at him, and he's worked. That's something that when we're talking about adding him, I talked to a lot of his former coaches and just the work ethic that he has, and he is the quintessential gym rat. He loves to get in early. He loves to spend time at his craft. So it's been fun to work with him through this offseason.
And with that, let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Tim, like everything that I've heard relative to Kevin Stefanski and Deshaun Watson in the offseason, and that's going to make or break what the Browns do this year.
No question about it. I mean, you hope if you're the Browns that Deshaun Watson becomes the guy that he was in Houston, multiple Pro Bowls, took his team to the playoffs in 2018 and 2019. That's what you paid 6 draft picks for, including 3 first-round picks. That's what you paid $230 million in fully guaranteed money. That's why you were willing to take the hits of, last summer when, the Browns were just so much negative things said about them for why would you give all this to Deshaun Watson considering all the stuff that was going on off the field. If he plays well and if he takes the Browns deep in the playoffs, possibly even to a Super Bowl title, then, it'll have all been worth it essentially for the Browns. And for Deshaun Watson, I think it's important, that he got those 6 games, that he got to re-experience what full game NFL speed feels like. Because there's only so much work you can do in practice. There's only so much you can do away from the practice field. There's only so much you can do until you actually step into the live fire and understand what it feels like to get there again. And I think, with Watson getting those 6 games out of the way, even though, pretty inconsistent throughout the 6 games, didn't really have, much of a consistent stretch of great play outside of the second half against Washington when he had those 3 touchdown passes. You really only saw glimpses of what it can be. Now that that's out of the way, now that he's got another year in Cleveland with the Browns, playing with Kevin Stefanski, and all these players he has, there's more comfortability. And I imagine what we've seen in minicamp, he looks more comfortable. He looked great in minicamp. We'll have to see how this translates to training camp, of course. But the signs are good right now for Deshaun Watson, the Browns. It's just a question of how it translates to winning on the field.
Yeah, and it's important to remember this is a guy that's still 27 years old, so he should be coming into his prime. Guys like that have been to 3 Pro Bowls like he has don't become available very often, so that's why the Browns gave up what they gave up. Pro Football Focus ranking the running back rooms, the units. Number 1 was the 49ers. Number 2, the Falcons. Number 3, the Browns ahead of the Titans. Number 4, it's kind of a curious ranking there. They go Niners, Falcons, Browns, Titans, Colts. Again, you could say Nick Chubb is probably the best running back in the NFL.
You can absolutely make a case for it. I mean, he's obviously not had the kind of touches that Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor have had over the last couple of seasons, but that's certainly been by design, I think, to save some mileage on Nick Chubb and have him for potentially that extra year or two compared to some of these other guys. So I think that's why you have to believe Nick Chubb. Even though he's as good as there is in the NFL, he just hasn't quite put up the numbers, just because the usage hasn't quite been as you would typically see out of a team that has a caliber running back that the Browns do, Nick Chubb. And I think the fact that I look at this unit ranking, clearly the Niners are number 1. Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell would start for so many teams at running back. Plus, they could just throw Deebo Samuel in the backfield, have him get the ball, and all of a sudden you got 3 really good running backs there. But what I think is going to be interesting for the Browns in the running game is what do they get out of Jerome Ford this year? Because it unless something crazy happens in the next month or two, you would have to imagine he's the number 2 guy. There was plenty to like last year. Special teams, he was very good in the return game, great in the preseason. Getting handoffs. I think the Jacksonville game, the first preseason game, he showed a lot of promise, a lot of good plays from him. Just didn't really get a lot of opportunities in the regular season, and you can understand why, because 3 veteran backs in front of him, and Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, Dearness Johnson. Those last 2 guys are gone. So you imagine Ford moves up to number 2, and I think he's got some speed. He's got some really good speed, and I think that speed can make him a good complement to Nick Chubb, and that ability to get outside and break off some decent runs. Just to spell Nick Chubb a little bit, I think is going to be important.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Is it an organizational thing where you don't want to run Nick Chubb as many times as is normal? We'll find that out. Along those lines, CBS Sports, Pete Prisco, the top 100 players in the NFL. Earlier in the show, we showed Myles Garrett was number 5. Nick Chubb is ranked 33rd, and Joel Bitonio checks in at 49. Denzel Ward was an honorable mention. But again, top 100 players, regardless of position. Top 3 were quarterbacks. It went Mahomes, Allen, and Burrow. Nick Chubb, 33, and that shows you just how well thought of he is, a position that isn't really valued. And you think we're lying, look at what they're wanting to pay running backs.
Yeah, I mean, the running back position kind of has a short shelf life because of, the typical wear and tear. And I think the fact, like I was talking about earlier, that, they have made a conscious effort, I think, to keep Nick Chubb from getting, the carries that Derrick Henry has. It can certainly save him a little bit and extend his career just a little bit. And that ranking is really interesting, and you can understand why, because, I mean, it's clear when you watch him, he's one of the most talented players in the NFL, regardless of position. There's few backs in the NFL that have the ability, every time they touch the football, to be a threat to take it all the way to the end zone. And, it doesn't matter how stacked up the box is. Chubb has the speed, he's got the vision, and he's able to get out of that first tackle and make somebody else have to make the play. And when you can break tackles in the NFL, that's such a huge asset for an offensive player, whether it's a running back, receiver, tight end, or quarterback, or whoever. If you can get out of that first tackle, if you can make a guy miss or something of that sort, then that really increases your value. And how often have we seen Nick Chubb get through that first wave of defenders, get into the second level, and really, turn, a 2-yard gain into about a 20-yard gain. And those type of things, regardless of position, are so important. And we see Nick Chubb do that on a fairly regular basis.
Let's turn our attention to second-year wide receiver David Bell. Jack Duffin tweets this out, and it's a comparison between what the average for a third-round rookie wide receiver is for the last 5 years and what David Bell did as a rookie. So that's an average rookie year for third-round wide receiver the last 5 years. 36 targets, 22 catches, 282 yards. David Bell's production last year, 32 targets, 24 catches, 214 yards. We say this because there's Browns fans think that David Bell struggled. The other thing I would warn is Cedric Tillman is a third-round wide receiver. So the production that you see there, that you saw from David Bell, is typical for where he was drafted, and you shouldn't expect a whole lot more than that from Cedric Tillman, who was a third-round pick.
Yeah, no, let's also not forget that, there's a couple of factors that play into it. Number one, David Bell was a late third-round pick. We're talking 99th overall. Cedric Tillman, 74th overall, earlier third-round pick, so it's reasonable to expect that Tillman should be able to do a little more, I think, than David Bell as a rookie. But the second thing that hurt him, I think it hurt him probably more than anything, was the fact, where he was in the depth chart of pass catchers. Third receiver behind Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones. And if you want to throw David Njoku into that discussion as well, then suddenly you become the fourth target in that receiver in that pass catching group. Add in the fact that, playing with Jacoby Brissett for the first 11 games of last season, they obviously weren't going to throw the football a lot. And if they were, it wasn't going to be out of sets that had more than two, sometimes three receivers. And it was very, very much kind of a more buttoned-up passing game than you would expect this year out of Deshaun Watson and the Browns, given the fact that they have a much better quarterback in terms of, the ability to throw the football. So obviously there were a lot of reasons that opportunities for David Bell just weren't necessarily going to be there for him. And, I think it's easy to assume, when you look at a draft class, that you look at it on paper, you're like, oh, all these guys should be good right away. They're to a degree very good college players. Well, there's a reason, that teams pass on them. And in the case of David Bell, teams pass on him 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And, that doesn't make him a bad player, just makes him, a player that needs to grow into the NFL more than others. They don't have the dynamic athleticism to really blend in more easily than, those top 5 or top 10 picks or whatever. Those are guys that need to learn the game more and understand the nuance before they can really contribute at a high level.
Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com, and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, talk a little bit about the Browns getting away to start training camp in the AFC North. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Browns will start training camp about 5 weeks, and they will start it on the road, if you will. They'll head to Greenbrier in West Virginia. Kevin Stefanski on the Rich Eisen show talked about the decision to take it on the road.
We're fortunate that we get to play in that Hall of Fame game, and we get to honor Joe Thomas throughout that week. And what that extra week gave us was a longer runway into the season. And I just felt that since we don't go away for camp, since we're in Berea, once we get there for training camp and throughout the season, I thought it was could be a good opportunity just to get away. And, going to be away, I think, for 8 nights. And the Greenbrier is a place that has hosted teams before. I just thought with this longer time, let's get away. Let's get out of town. Let's go somewhere where cell service is really, really bad. And let's go practice. And just putting people under the same roof, that kind of achieves a bunch of team bonding, period, that in the old days, as you know, camp would go from about 6:30 a.m. till about 10 p.m.
Right.
Well, you can't do that anymore within the time frame. So guys are leaving the building at, call it 7 or so, and they're going back to their families. Well, now's an opportunity for just 8 nights. It's not like it's 2 months worth of it, but can we get away together under one roof, figuratively, and come together as a team while you're working, while you're really putting in that work?
Tim, I think the best thing is there hasn't been any goofy distractions so far in the offseason, and that's a different thing for Kevin Stefanski. He had COVID the first couple of years. He had the whole Deshaun Watson thing. I like the idea. Let them get away. Let them figure out what they can do.
Yeah, you bring up a good point that there's no overarching, cloud going on with, the team and whatever. Like you said, 2020 was COVID. 2021 was, Baker Mayfield in his future. 2022 was what went on with Deshaun Watson and bringing him into Cleveland. So 2023, right now it's obviously very quiet, and I think that's good for Stefanski and the Browns. And I see this trip for them, going to the Greenbrier to work out for week plus as nothing but a good thing. I mean, we've seen, last season in particular, just the chemistry issues this team really had. Even going back 2021, they didn't quite have the chemistry that you would need a team to have if you expect them to make a deep run in the playoffs, like you would imagine the Browns expect to do with Deshaun Watson, with the talent they've added, not just this offseason, but the past couple of years. You feel like Stefanski understands the value of that chemistry and doing what it takes to, make sure he gets that. I like, how he was joking that there's really no cell service probably in the Greenbrier. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think it's good, for the Browns just to have that ability to kind of go off in their own area, do their own thing, and just kind of get that team bonding going after a week. When you're kind of out on your own almost, and you're in your own isolated area, you kind of have no choice but to bond as a team. And to do that early in training camp, that's a good potential sign for them going forward, and we'll see what kind of effect it has.
All right. Also from the Rich Eisen Show, Kevin Stefanski talked about the AFC North this year.
I know this. It's an awesome division, bunch of great teams, bunch of great coaches. We love competing against this division because if you come out of this division, you're battle tested. It's that good, top to bottom. So we're excited about the opportunity. I think we have our entire division in the first 4 weeks of the season, which is a huge opportunity for us. So we'll see everybody early, but just having competed against these teams the last 4 years, every game is going to matter with the last 2 minutes of the game.
And I like the idea of it being an opportunity, because if you come out and you play well at the beginning of the year, you have a chance to kind of open up some space.
Yeah, if you go 500 in that stretch, I mean, that's, if you go 500 in that first 4 weeks at minimum, taking 2 of those 3 AFC North games, you put yourself in a good position, because then, after that 49ers game, after the bye, the schedule kind of lightens up. You have Indianapolis, and then you have a home game as the Cardinals, which are sandwiched around a trip to Seattle, which is going to be a tricky game. But these first 4 games are going to be massive, because the good news for the Browns is, as tough as the division is right now and as tough as that schedule is, the good news is at least you get 2 of those 3 division games at home, which I think is a big thing for them. They've obviously, had plenty of success against the Bengals in particular. Joe Burrow's only beaten them once. Browns have been able to beat the Ravens the last couple of years up at Cleveland Browns Stadium. They've had some success against, all 3 of these teams. It's not like the past where they've failed to beat any. They've beaten all 3 of them, very recently. So the gap is very much closed. And when you look at this division in general, I mean, you could make a very strong case this is the best in football right now. All 4 teams have a legitimate case to make it to the playoffs. 3 teams have quarterbacks you could argue you could say are certainly top 10 quarterbacks. The Browns might have Deshaun Watson will have to prove it on the field that he is still a top 10 quarterback after not really having shown that form since 2020. And the Steelers, they may not have that quarterback, but they have one of the best defenses in football, and they added to it by really bolstering that secondary. So no easy games in that division, no matter who you're playing.
Tim Bielik, plain dealer, cleveland.com. As always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out. Always really good stuff concerning the Browns. Plain dealer, cleveland.com as well. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.